Welcome back, fancy lords and ladies. I am your host, the fanciest man of Cornwood, and I'm back with another deck tech tonight. And this deck tech is actually one that was voted on and chosen by people here on the channel. So I just want to start by thanking everyone that voted on that. Be on the lookout for more of those choices coming up, because I plan on doing at least one deck tech each week that is voted on by the community and actually picked out by you guys. So tonight we have Deathleaper Terror Weapon for 2, a red and a green. This is a legendary creature Tyrannid from the Fallout set. It has Flash, Haste, and Flesh Hooks. Creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn have Double Strike, and it is a 3/3. So we've done some decks on the channel that are more interested in kind of slowly building up a board state, slowly adding value to the board, and just eventually overwhelming our opponents with that. Deathleaper is quite the opposite. We're going to be going for those huge Gruul alpha strikes with tons of creatures on our board, lots of power coming down and swinging right away, trying to just overpower our opponents and overrun them on their boards. So let's take a look at our strategy overview. So obviously our strategy starts with Deathleaper. All of our creatures that are coming in, we want to have haste. We want to be giving them double strike and just enabling these big swings. One kind of nostalgic throwback that I'm putting in the deck, and I think actually works really well with Deathleaper, is Ball Lightning. This is for 3 red, a creature elemental. It's a 6/1. It has trample and haste, and at the beginning of the end step, sacrifice this creature. So there's a few variants of this in the deck, and we really love that this comes down as a 6/1 with double strike. We're not so worried about that last bit of text about sacrificing it at the end of the turn, because if you look at our last card here in the strategy overview, we have tons of ways to get value from it before the end of the turn. We have Greater Good here for 2 and 2 green. It's an enchantment with sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. We have a few different variations of that in the deck, but then we also have other ways to take advantage of those high-powered creatures before we have to sack them at the end of the turn. And of course, we are hoping that we can get in for at least, maybe 8 or 10 damage with them, even if they're blocked, just to kind of help make it worth it, even though they have that last bit of text about sacrificing them. So the other direction we're going with creatures, because Deathleaper is going to give all of our hasty creatures double strike, we want stuff with Myriad, we want stuff with Encore, we want ways to have creatures copy themselves and just add more and more power to the deck. And here we have maybe our best example of that. This is Caller of the Pack. So for 5 and 2 green, we get an 8/6 creature beast with trample and Myriad. So just simple math, when this comes down, if we can give it haste, then we will have basically a 16/12, well, a 16/6. If you kind of include that double strike damage, that will make 2 or 3 copies, depending on how many opponents we have that are attacking all of our opponents, attacking all the other opponents, and just add a ton of power to the board. We're hoping to add about 30 to 40 power to the board, at least potential damage to the board whenever Caller of the Pack comes down, which is obviously going to be pretty difficult for our opponents to deal with. So let's look at a few more examples, because, I brought up Myriad, I brought up Encore. Both of our first 2 creatures are going to showcase that a little bit more. First, we've got El-Turel Survivors for 3 and a red. This is a 0/4 creature Tiefling Peasant with trample and Myriad, and as long as this is attacking, it gets +X/+O, where X is the number of lands defending player controls. Obviously, that can get a little bit crazy toward the end of the game. People tend to run lands in Commander, so we're going to be looking at maybe some 6 or 7 power Myriad copies coming down and swinging with double strike, and that could be huge for us. We also have Finclade Fugitives for 5 and a green. This is a 7/4 creature, Elf Salamander Rogue. It's pretty interesting creature types there. Finclade Fugitives can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and here we have our first example of Encore for 4 and a green. And Encore means that we can exile this for that cost, and exiling it from our graveyard. And then for each opponent, we make those copies that are attacking them, and they gain haste. We sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, and we have to activate that as a sorcery. So again, if we have Greater Good out, if we have some of these cards that benefit from sacking things with high power, then Finclade Fugitives is perfect. and it's going to help us offset that cost of kind of losing the copies at the end of the turn, because we're going to be getting tons of value from them anyway. This next example of this part of the deck, I think, is really going to be backbreaking for our opponents, because we do have those sack outlets in the deck, and we have plenty of them. This is Hideous Taskmaster for 6 and a red. It is a 7/2 creature Eldrazi. It has Devoid, so technically it doesn't have a color. Luckily, that doesn't really mess up any of the things we have going on in our deck. But when you cast this spell, for each opponent, gain control of up to one target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1 until end of turn. So Trample and Haste, obviously those are perfect with Deathleaper. This is a big creature coming down and swinging for about 14 damage. But then also that Annihilator 1 is going to force our opponents to sacrifice permanents while we're attacking them with their own creatures, which that can be a pretty big swing. You know, it's Commander. We're hoping that our opponents are playing some big scary creatures that we can take with this. And it also works pretty well if we have some mana lying around, with our last example here of how we're going to pack our board with power and how we're going to be swinging out with these big alpha strikes. And that is Ortheon, Hero of Lavabrink. So for 3 and a red, this is a 3/3 legendary creature, human soldier. He has 2 activated abilities. For 1 and a red and tapping it, you can create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Activate only as a sorcery. Again, we don't mind that we have to sacrifice this token, because we're going to find ways to use that token as just kind of fodder for different value engines in the deck, and also different ways to just take advantage of creatures that are on our board with high power. And yeah, lots of effects we're going to have. I'll show you some examples of those in just a minute. But Ortheon's other activated ability, for 6 and 3 red in tapping it, you can create 5 tokens that are copies of another target creature you control. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So Ortheon's second ability is basically, because of some of these creatures we have in our deck, and especially if we can make 5 tokens of a myriad creature, that's going to make then more tokens of itself. This can basically be a 9 mana tap, win the game. As long as our opponents aren't packing instant speed board wipes or something like that, then this is just going to be a crazy amount of power. With Deathleaper out, obviously it's twice as deadly, because all of those tokens will have Double Strike as well. All right, so next let's look at kind of those other ways that we're going to get value from our creatures with high power. And some of these are actually going to be win conditions for the deck as well. The first example is actually a way to ramp and kind of keep that engine going of dropping big creatures and then potentially returning them to hand, or using them for these sacrifice effects, and that is Alina, Kessig Trapper. For 4 and a red, this is a 4/3 legendary creature, human scout with first strike. She also has tap, add an amount of red equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So Alina is going to enable us to drop a big creature. If it's something like Ball Lightning or something like that that has a higher power than its mana value, then that's even better, because we're going to benefit from that difference and be able to hopefully pump even bigger creatures out into the board for the following turn or something like that. But it's just a nice way to get extra value from big creatures. It's a nice way to keep things going with the deck. And if we have Greater Good out or something like that, then we can just get this cycle going where, you know, we're having these big creatures enter the board, and then we're using Alina to just cast bigger and bigger stuff. Next, we have Altar of Dementia, and for 2 mana, this is an artifact where you can sacrifice a creature. Target player puts a number of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. So they mill that many cards. Altar of Dementia is pretty well known as a win con, and in this deck, it can really get out of hand if we can get a few of the myriad creatures out, especially those higher power myriad creatures like Caller of the Pack. You know, then you have a potential for milling, 16 or 24 cards just from one cycle of dropping those down and attacking. And we really like also that this is kind of board wipe insurance. If we have some big creatures out, we've built up a big board state, then this is going to let us punish our opponents for trying to clear the board or get rid of all of our creatures at once or something like that. All right, next we have a little bit different part of the toolkit here, but I think it's really important for Ball Lightning and those creatures that would be sacrificed at the end of the turn, of which we have a pretty good number in the deck, and that is First Responder for 3 and a green. This is a 3/3 creature ogre citizen with vigilance, and at the beginning of your end step, you may return another creature you control to its owner's hand, then put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that creature's power on First Responder. So, First Responder is not only a way to keep a card like Ball Lightning or a creature like Ball Lightning that would sacrifice itself at the end of the turn safe, because we can stack those triggers to where this happens first before the creature would need to be sacrificed, which is obviously great. It helps us reuse these hasty creatures with big power. It helps keep Deathleaper safe if we're concerned that someone's going to wipe the board or something like that. If we have extra mana lying around, we can just put 3 tokens on First Responder, take Deathleaper into our hand, keep it safe for a turn cycle, and then just replay it at instant speed, since it has that flash. But this also helps us with myriad creatures. If we have creatures that would be sacrificed at the end of the turn because of myriad or encore, then at least one of those copies can help just pump First Responder and get it bigger and bigger. We have some trample enablers in the deck, so that's going to allow First Responder to trample over once it does get big. So yeah, just lots of upside to First Responder in this deck, and actually a really nice card to get out early, so that you have that flexibility. And last, we have Warstorm Surge for 5 and a red. This is an enchantment. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. And kind of like Ultra Dementia, this is a well-known commander staple because of the potential here for just big swings on the board. With Myriad, with Encore, anything that adds a bunch of high-power creatures to our board at once, this just gets out of hand. It can, wipe out an opponent's best creatures. It can take out an opponent that's maybe not at the highest life total, things like that. Just a really, really cool piece to kind of add on top of all the attacking that we're going to be doing. All right, so let's look at a couple more examples here of just how we're going to benefit from these big creatures. It's obviously one of the main themes of the deck, but we want, in addition to the card draw, in addition to what Deathleaper is bringing, we want ways to support that theme, and then also just other ways to benefit from it. So first we've got Anger for 3 and a red. This is a 2/2 creature incarnation with haste, and as long as Anger is in your graveyard and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. So because we have these sack outlets, if we have to play Anger, that's not a problem. We could be that we're discarding it to Greater Good or one of these effects that draw us a lot of cards at once, because typically we will need to discard down to hand size then. We also have Brawn in the deck, which is a green creature that does a similar thing, but will give your creatures, I believe, trample instead. So yeah, a couple different ways that we can benefit from having to discard down after we draw all these cards. Next, we have Fires of Yavimaya for 1, a red and a green. This is an enchantment. Creatures you control have haste, and you can sacrifice Fires of Yavimaya to give target creature +2/+2 until end of turn. So this is just one of a few different haste enablers along with Anger that we have in the deck. We have a few creatures that have haste already, and obviously that's extremely useful to have with Deathleaper. But we also want ways to pump our creatures that maybe don't come with haste built in, so they can benefit from that double strike from Deathleaper. All right, next we have a card draw option. That's Garruk's Uprising for 2 and a green. This is an enchantment, and when it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card as well. So this works really well for a couple of different reasons with the deck. The main one really is that it's giving our creatures trample. The card draw is really nice. It's obviously Gruul needs to be drawing new creatures because they tend to get removed. Your biggest threats will hopefully get to swing once or twice, but then after that, there's always the chance an opponent has some kind of interaction and can get them off the board. So if we have this out and we have one of those myriad creatures or an encore creature that's going to give us a bunch of copies with 4 or more power at once, then obviously we're just drawing a ton of cards, and it's just going to help fuel things for the deck. So a really nice card, another one that's really great to get early and have down as you're taking those big swings and getting more and more big creatures on the board. Lastly, here for this power overwhelming category, we have Xenagos, God of Revels, for 3 and a red and a green. This is a 6/5 legendary enchantment creature, God. Indestructible as long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7. Xenagos isn't a creature, so that is how many of the red and green mana pips we have on permanents that we control out on the board. But what we really want from Xenagos is this last ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another creature you control gains haste and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So along with Deathleaper, obviously this is going to allow a creature that's come down with high power to just get massive. It's going to be swinging with Devil Strike. This can easily, again, take out an opponent that is at low life. It can swing a board that's just been wiped back in our favor because of that indestructible. We're in Gruul, so we're going to be ramping quite a bit. We're going to have plenty of mana, hopefully lying around just waiting to take that big Alpha Strike type swing. All right, and the last category we're going to look at is just a few different ways that we can close out games, that we can just maybe get additional win cons on the board, and then also different ways outside of just card draw and things like that with greater good, that we can use these really high power creatures to just knock out opponents, knock out threats, things like that. So the first one we have is a win con, and that's Beastmaster Ascension for 2 and a green. This is an enchantment with whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. And as long as it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. Even though we won't be getting those quest counters from all of our myriad tokens and things like that, just being able to have this out and activate it when we get a myriad creature out to swing with, that's another 15 power even without Deathleaper on the board, and potentially another 30 power or so with Deathleaper on the board, since we'll have that Devil Strike in place hopefully. So just a really nice win con that we can hopefully get out early, or at least get out once we've built out our board, and maybe drop it one turn, attack the next turn, and activate it. Really great way to close out games in an aggressive deck like this. Next, we have 2 cards. I'm only going to read Fling because they're so similar. I will point out that Kazul's Fury has a backside to it that is just a tap land that adds red. So obviously that gives us some flexibility with this card. If we just desperately need a land, then we don't necessarily have to hold on to it to use the first feature. But Fling is for 1 and a red, an instant, as is Kazul's Fury, except it's 2 and a red. And both of them have, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, and then they both deal damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. So what we'd like to do is get Xenagos, or maybe First Responder, some way to get a creature up to just a ridiculous power, and then just hold these at instant speed as a way to benefit if someone tries to remove them, or just take out an opponent that's low and maybe threatening to stall the game or anything like that. We want to have an option to just make big amounts of damage in a really short amount of time. And that's what these 2 are really, really good for. We also have Terror of the Peaks for 3 and 2 red. This is a 5/4 creature dragon with flying. Spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So this is basically Warstorm Surge on a creature. And with Myriad, with Encore, with ways to make tokens of our creatures like Ortheon, this is obviously just another really efficient way to spread around damage and to do it very quickly. We can use it to take out creatures on our opponent's side. We can use it to just do damage to our opponent's face and hopefully get that last bit of lethal after maybe a big attack the turn before or something like that. So that is the deck, guys. Thank you so much for watching these deck techs. Please let me know what you think in the comments. If you have any additions to the deck, anything you think I might have left out or overlooked or something like that. I always love to see those because it just helps people to make these decks even better, and it helps me to make them even better. If you like the content, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe. I will be having more of these deck techs coming out. I'm also going to be adding a weekly schedule this week for when you can expect certain kinds of videos to drop and things like that. But thank you so much for watching. Have a great night and keep playing Commander.